My guest in this week's episode of Suds Search is Joel Klettke, founder of Case Study Buddy and Business Casual Copywriting. In my humble opinion, Joel is one of the very best copywriters in the industry. He frequently presents at conferences on topics related to copywriting and case study creation. A few places you may have heard Joel present include Content Jam, Learn Inbound, the Unbounce CTA Conference, and the Utah DMC Conference. Case Study Buddy has become the go-to resource for creating case studies. Joel and his talented team handle all of the nettlesome but important work of creating compelling case studies. They work with businesses of all sizes. I'm going to spend a lot of our conversation talking about case studies and how to effectively use them as a multi-purpose asset. And of course, we'll chat about copywriting. Joel is described as a conversion copywriter. I'm going to ask him what differentiates conversion copywriting from more traditional copywriting. Grab something cold to drink and join me for a conversation with Joel Klettke, one of the top copywriters in the world. We'll talk about what mistakes businesses are making with their case studies, how case studies improve CRO and increase inbound traffic, and I'll ask him a little bit about a trip he took to New Zealand. All right, Joel Klettke, welcome to Suds Search. How you doing?
I'm good. I kind of feel like in those old-timey circuses where there's like the plate jugglers and they're like spinning stuff and then running back and forth. And
you feel
stuff.
Like that? Yeah.
I feel like I'm doing that, but then like someone also let out the circus elephants at the same time. And they're stampeding.
Well, I hope having a beverage with me in the afternoon, just you could take a breath and maybe get back to that afterwards.
Yeah.
So, well, I wanted to ask you about case studies. You and your team at Case Study Buddy have this reputation as the go-to source, and I think it's such an interesting niche. Do you have any internal data? And I can kind of conceptually understand how important case studies are for a business like mine. Do you have any internal data that just kind of really brings it home how important case studies are for businesses?
Internal data, it's something we're working on. We want to run more studies with our clients because we're finally now reaching this critical mass to make that viable, where we have clients who are doing these in like the dozens and able to test a lot of stuff. There's a lot that we can point to in terms of like successes within our client base. I think there's a lot of good data out there, not ours, but from other companies. So when you look at, the Content Marketing Institute, every single year when you look at B2B content types that they feel are most effective or they feel are driving the greatest returns, unless something dramatic happened, it's always in the top three. It's been, I believe it's been number one in the past. When you look at Harvard Business Review and you look at the fact that the number of people involved in making a B2B decision is growing, not shrinking. It's getting more complex, not less complex, more people to sign off, not less people to sign off. And then when you couple that with research from DocSend that looked at 34 million different types of content assets and looked at completion rates and actual read rates and the effectiveness of different asset types, across that 34 million different types of content and B2B content, case studies had the highest completion rate, and it wasn't even close. 83% completion rate. Wow. So when you look at the bar graph, it's like case studies are this and completion rate for everything else is like this. It's abysmal for everything else. So when you kind of couple the fact that these are assets that get passed around in B2B, they get completed in B2B, that B2B marketers themselves are citing these as their most effective assets. And then going back years to like 2016 and beyond, there's all kinds of studies that show, RSW and all kinds of studies that show multiple times demand gen and all this demand based. Yeah. Lots of different external studies that show that these assets are super effective, routinely rank in the top three, often number one in terms of B2B content for driving a decision. So we hope to have some of our own data in kind of the year to come. We have stories, we have anecdotes, we have customers who are using them really well, but there's enough data out there to say like these absolutely make an impact, especially for the climate of where B2B is headed and how those decisions get done.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that gets exciting for me right away is that a case study can be used as such a multi-purpose asset. So I could use it in a newsletter, on my social feed, on my website. It helps just about every part of your business. I would imagine that like you guys actually interact a lot with the sales team at a department as well. Like Who likes this stuff more, marketing or sales?
That's so contentious because it's often, what we often find is it's marketing who contacts us, but it's sales who needs these things like oxygen, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the reason Case Study Buddy can exist, is because there's this conflict between the two. When we look at our customer base, and this is something, we actually do see a solid trend in, is there's very rarely clear ownership over who is responsible. Not necessarily who's responsible for contacting us, but when we press into it, who owns case studies? Who owns the case study function? Often it gets defaulted to marketing because they have the writer resources, but sales needs them. Customer success now, increasingly, we're seeing people from that role come in and say, our whole company needs these, and I've been tasked with going and get these. But there's no consistency to whose responsibility it is to make sure these things happen. And so that two things we're trying to evangelize and really get people to buy into and see. One, you brought up yourself, is there's utility for these things across the whole journey. It's not just sales at the end, sending a PDF. That's the relationship people think they have with these things, or chucking it into a resources section on the site. That's the relationship people have with these today. But in reality, some of our most successful clients are using these as demand gen assets in advertisements, in their internal newsletters. We have clients who use these for like staff onboarding and morale boosters and those types of things. So they have so much utility. And then the other side of it is we really want companies to start thinking about, how do we make case studies inevitable? Like, how do we systematize our business so that everybody is clear on whose responsibility this is, and how we not only, make them possible, but like I said, make them inevitable. Because right now, for a lot of companies, these are happy accidents. It's like a customer's happy, they put up their hand, they say, "Oh, I want to tell my story." So companies are relying on that. That's not a great way to live if you have no system for securing these. So that is kind of, for our future, what we're really excited about. But to bring it back to your direct question, there's no consistency. Sales needs them. Marketing is tasked to get them. And the most recent trend we're seeing is more and more customer success roles just advocating for themselves and be like, we have frontline visibility. We want these. How do we get them done?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, everywhere I've been, including Search Lab, where I am now, we've always kind of understood the importance of case studies. I think it's because of the reason that you mentioned, that nobody really owns the case study, but I never imagined not doing them in-house. How did you come up with the idea of a business that would help with this really important function? Because you're solving a problem that I think everywhere I've been, we've had this problem where it's like, if it gets done the last minute. It's kind of like slapdash and not very well done. And they're never, even if they get done, they're not to what we want. How did you even come up with the idea to do this as a service?
So my day job, let's call it that, I work a lot on conversion copywriting. That's been my specialty for years now. So I get a lot of visibility into B2B marketing and sales, and I get to interact with a lot of different departments in different companies. And so I had just wrapped up a project for WP Engine, and there was someone there that was my point of contact, and just an awesome guy, really well connected. He was on their advisory board. We got on real well through the project. And so he said, hey, after the project, he asked me, hey, do you do case studies? And he's the kind of guy that you just don't say no to. So I'm like, sure, I can put that together. He said, well, I've got a company that I advise. They're smaller kind of startup. They need this asset. Would you be willing to, can you do it? I said, sure. And that was Pingboard. That was customer number one, was Pingboard. And so this was before Case Study Buddy as a concept had even occurred to me. But in the process of doing that study myself, a lot of things became really clear really fast. Number one is that most companies have no roadmap for getting these done. They are doing what you would expect companies to do, which is Googling how to write a case study and trying to cobble together bits and pieces of intel. But there's a huge lack of not only process, but something I've learned with my relationship to businesses is when there's a lack of process, there's a lack of confidence. Where there's a lack of confidence, there's a sales opportunity. And so I thought, okay,
great point. Yeah.
That's interesting. And then I kind of put my head up and I thought, wait a minute. All right. So in the process of doing this, I realized too, not only is there not a process for these, the process is way tougher than even I expected. There are so many moving pieces. Who's running the interview? Who's contacting the client? Who's, like writing it up? Who's chasing up for approval? Who owns these different functions? And so I realized like, this is not like a blog post where you like hand a topic to a writer and like, go for it. Not if you're doing them right. It's there's lots of little steps, nuanced pieces, and an art to running a great interview, to telling a great story, to designing a great end asset. So again, there was complexity. And now it was really getting exciting for me, because anywhere there's no process for something that's complex and there's no confidence, now you've really got a sales opportunity. Well, then I put these together and I thought, all right, well, surely someone has come out and said, this is all we do. We've mastered this. We've got it dialed in. We can take care of this. And I looked around and it was a wasteland. It was like, okay, this is one more like add-on service that's kind of done okay. There was Casey Hibbard, credit to her. Like, she was the most visible specialist in the space at the time, but one woman can't eat a whole market. And so I kind of thought, all right, well, we've got this recipe for complexity, lack of confidence. A lot of companies clearly need this, because when I looked around at like competitors in the space, like the most established companies had them. And the more that I kind of talked to people, the more they said, we've got that pain. And when you bring that all together, not only does it start making sense, but it's a premium asset you can charge a pretty good amount for, because it's tough to do.
No doubt.
So those ingredients all came together, and I just thought, all right, well, why not me? Like, I will start the company that specializes in these and can do them at scale and cares about all the little nuanced parts of the process. I originally, I anything I do, I want to do with my own two hands first, to kind of understand what can happen and what goes wrong. So for the first sort of 6 months, I was doing all of it: the interviews, the writing, the project management. I was whacking moles. I was learning the complexities, and then started to scale it over time. And, that question of like, how did I know there was demand for it? It really it was like a light bulb went on. As soon as I did that first study and did the research and started to look around, I'm like, wait, every agency, every software company, every B2B anything relies on social proof to sell. And like, anytime you've got a big wide market that you can either like try to take as much of it on as you want, or narrow down, and it's still a gigantic, like if we only served software companies, we'd still have tons of potential. So at that point I was like, okay, the ingredients are all here. Like, I'm going to do this.
All right. Well, you got my mind going when you said most of these people have no process, and that leads to no confidence. I think that's a great point. And it made me wonder, you probably have seen more case studies than just about anybody I know. First of all, what are some of the common mistakes that people have? And if you have any just complete epic fails, I would love to hear about that as well.
Oh, I got stories. Some of the most common, let's start with the most common issues. I think the number one issue is these are hard to do. And so companies tend to do one of two things. They go, well, we'll backbench them, we'll get to them someday, but they never do, because it's hard. They have no process. So number one issue is just not doing them because they're hard. No one owns it. The second big issue is they're hard to do. So people try to cheat and say, well, we'll just kind of write it internally. Like, we don't need to bother the client. Not only are you setting yourself up for like massive potential litigation on the worst end of it, you're also even on a practical end. That's like, a case study is not about you. It's about the customer.
I was going to ask you about this. Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. Like, I'm a testimonial for a company that we don't use anymore. And if somebody asked me about them, I probably wouldn't recommend them. Like, it wouldn't be a good idea. But I still am on like my name and my face on their website. Like, does that actually happen where people will, or am I a strange case, or have you seen this before where people will just like take the liberty of putting something?
That's the epic fails part that we're getting to. That's the thing, is they decide, well, how bad could it be if we just write this thing and we'll just put it out there, and they take the forgiveness, not permission approach. The problem is you are gambling with very high stakes. If your customer is pissed, it's not just a cease and desist. They may cease and desist paying you and being your customer. You risk getting the story wrong and telling the wrong story. We have had, in terms of epic fails, we have had people sign on to do a case study, and we get on the call with the customer, and the customer is actively pissed. They're like actively like, yeah, we're actually not that happy. You're like, why did you agree to do this? And like, well, we just thought it'd be a good way to give some feedback. Like, that's something we've seen. We have a client, or had a client, I should say. We need to sweat the small stuff because we deal with enterprise, because we deal with a sensitive space. Our number one priority is we treat customer relationships with kid gloves. We never want to be the cause of damage to anyone's relationship. And so when we get questions like, well, why wouldn't we do this in-house and whatever, it's like, we're going to give them a better, more efficient, more targeted experience than your internal team could. Plus, we're going to take care of stuff you're not even thinking about, like release and who needs to sign off and all of that stuff. Well, we had a client go through the whole process with, let's just call them like one of the enterprise retailers on the planet. We have all stepped inside one of these at some point in our lives, and they agreed to do it under the condition of anonymity because they said, we have a company policy flat out, we cannot be named, but they were still willing to kind of, bend the rules to take part in an anonymous study as long as we protect it. We did everything on our side to say, okay, no problem. Like, we can still tell a really compelling story that's anonymized. In fact, that's something we can talk about later, is like they can actually be better than named studies in some cases. But we did our job. Client knew this. We communicated all this. They know full well the implications of like what they're gambling with. So we send it over. A couple months later, I go back to their site. They've slapped the company's logo on the study. The study is anonymous, but the company's logo is right on the site, right? So, I mean, that you're playing with fire. Why would you potentially compromise a relationship like that? Not just from a financial standpoint, but like, trust is very hard to earn back. It's why we take our interviews so seriously. It's why for the 30 to 60 minutes we're on a call with your customer, we're professional and do the legwork and try to come in informed and try to feel out how their emotions are at. It's why we're, careful and persistent about following up to secure approval and all of this, because we know your relationships matter most. Trying to skirt that by just not involving the customer in the study in the first place, it's not a solution. That's just like problems. Like, you're standing on the edge of the cliff begging for a breeze. Like, it's not a good place to be.
Yeah, this definitely, I like your terminology. This is definitely a place where asking for forgiveness rather than permission is absolutely the wrong approach. So I mentioned at the beginning, these are, and I'm really fixated on that idea that these are multi-use assets, but I want to bring it down to the website level. So on a website, I've seen companies do this a few different ways. I've seen it where they'll have like a services page, and intertwined on the services page, they'll have a case study. Or I've seen it where they'll have a page with all their case studies, or maybe like a section on their site that has all their case studies. Do you have a preference for how case studies are used on a website? Do you have best practices?
I can share. The first thing to think about is the awareness level of a person on that page. If someone has, basically, it's not a hard and fast rule, but the less aware someone is, the less buy-in and attention you have from them. So if you're going to try to hit someone who is totally new to your company with a 2,000 word case study, it better be a damn good, super compelling case study. We kind of take the approach. I want to talk about how to display them on your site, because that's another common mistake. So it actually ties in nicely. But we take an approach with our clients, and we're doing better and better at this in time, of talking about nibble, bite, snack, meal, right? With a case study, you can break it all the way down to a nibble. And let's say the nibble is just a testimonial. It's just like a really compelling soundbite that's going to raise an eyebrow, pique interest, support a point. And so that testimonial can be really valuable in places like a sales page, and you can link off to a deeper asset, but you don't just want to make the deeper asset the only option. You want people to be able to get the gist and then explore it if they're intrigued. It can be really great for social media. Similarly, like a 15-second video versus like your 3-minute cut of the whole story. Like a 15-minute super compelling soundbite might be the better thing to have in that circumstance.
Right.
So we encourage clients to think of it like, okay, you want to appetize them towards the full meal. Maybe they start with a nibble, then they're interested in a bite. So a bite might be something like a slide deck or a one sheet where it's like just the facts. And then it's like, click here to learn more to get the full process or to like really blow it out and explore it. And by the time you get to meal, that's your meatiest asset. So that's where you're really getting lots of customer quotes. You're delving deep on the process and the execution and all of that. So in terms of how to display this on the site, number one, think about the awareness level. What is your lead actually ready for and receptive to in the context of that page? If it's a sales page, probably good idea to lead with a teaser, give them the option to explore the full meal deal if they're compelled by what you've shared, but don't slow them down. Don't throw sticks in the gears of their bike if they're in the wheels of the bike if they're already throttling towards taking an action. When you present case studies, this is the issue I wanted to talk about. A lot of companies, guaranteed, go to like throw a dart at an agency website, you'll see this mistake. What they do is they have this case studies page. Okay, you click through. It's the only place the case studies live, and then you click in there, and instead of having little synopses of like what was done or anything, it's just a big list of logos, and it's like, all right, like here's our case studies. Like, which one you want to read? Well, the problem is, I can guarantee you, I don't have to see your analytics. I don't have to see your Hotjar, any of it. I guarantee you, the number one most clicked one is the one furthest on the left and highest up, because that's the first one they see.
Yep.
The second one is the most well-known name brand, but like that's such a waste because people don't come in and go, I really want to read a case study about McDonald's. They go, okay, right. I have a problem. I have a goal. I have something I want to achieve. They want to read a case study that best reflects not the biggest enterprise of the enterprise company, but like, how did you solve a problem for someone like me that I can actually relate to? So instead of having just this long list of logos, the ones I especially hate are where you have to like mouse over the logo to get any kind of detail, even on like the result achieved.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So instead of doing that, like choose a handful of your best, or have the ability to filter down and give a quick synopsis. It doesn't even have to be a paragraph, but you can talk about what was the company, what was the impact or the problem that you solved, depending on the awareness level, and kind of give like the Cliff's notes. And then if they're intrigued by that premise of that story, they'll click in to read it. But like if you went to the library, right, and like everything was taken off of the books except for the names of the authors, you'd be like, I don't know what I want to read, right? We need that like synopsis or that genre information to make a decision surrounding like what's relevant to what I want to learn. Whereas companies tend to come at it through the lens of like, let's show them our biggest successes. And it's like, your big success might not matter one whit to someone who doesn't have that problem. I know my problems. I know my goals. If I see that reflected in the way that that's presented, that's where I'll go. So.
Yeah, it's about having empathy for the person who's actually coming to the site. So, well, awesome. Well, I think this is going to be a strange question, perhaps, but I think of digital marketing, you're usually doing one of two things. You're either like SEOs, we want to drive more visits to a website, or you're trying to make sure that a higher percentage of your existing traffic is converting into business. So think of CRO.
Sure.
It's very clear how case studies could help with CRO, but maybe you feel free to unpack that a little bit. I wonder, do case studies help drive more traffic to a website, even indirectly?
They absolutely can. And again, it just comes down to intent-built, like purpose-built studies, right? Let's say our goal is we want to use case studies in ads. We want to drive awareness. We want to drive new leads in, okay? In a typical case study, we might put a ton of focus on, like a big long story or the client name or whatever. But if we rewrite that same story to be a prescriptive how-to for a very evident problem. So let's say, let's imagine that I am let's say I do Facebook ads. I'm an agency, I do Facebook ads. If I have a case study where I got a brilliant result for a client, instead of just like going to social and being like, here's the logo and here's the incredible result and like click the study to learn more, I will flip that around and I'll turn it into a how-to piece. Not only like, here's the result, here's how you can go replicate that result. Now that's going to raise some hackles on people who are like, if we're giving away the secret sauce, like people just go do it themselves, but they won't. People are lazy. Not only that, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the years in the field. Like, so if you can put together a study with a prescriptive how-to, if I feel like I'm not only going to get sold to, but I'm going to learn something from an asset, now that's top of funnel content. Now that's somewhere I might check it out just because I'm interested in achieving that end goal. And then you've kind of inceptioned me where it's like, wait a second, they actually like, I love the process they've got. I've done this for myself. I have a post on Business Casual called How to Write an Agency, a services page that converts. And it's a case study. It's me writing how I wrote Siege Media's page. And I'm giving practical tips. I'm saying, go do this. And I'm laying out, really zeroing in on the how. So the lead might be the big result they want or the big outcome they want. The pitch might be, here's how to do it. And you can drive traffic that way. That's why we also talk about like, a lot of companies only gate their case studies. They gate them, like, give us your email. Like I've never, though it works in some situations, I've never understood why you would reduce the opportunity that someone sees an asset that might convince them to buy from you. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, well, we want to send them a nurture sequence. Like, well, if your case study is good enough, they will nurture themselves into contacting you. Like, why, I get it. I can hear, the salespeople in the room, like already clamoring, like, no, we have good data for this. And I get it. But, different use cases for different scenarios. We also, there's some interesting things you can do to play to like, we talk a lot about ads and my reflex still, because I've been in digital marketing for so long now, is like still think text-based ads. But like when we are in a case study, we get a great interview. Well, a lot of the platforms out there now have these interactive components, like Instagram's got video and audio, and TikTok, and wherever you want to be, Twitter, right? Why would you not take that interview, turn that into a soundbite? And now it's this skepticism buster where it's like, okay, in a particularly skeptical niche here, like we did these for rankings.io, and it's like, here is a lawyer whose time is literally money, spending time saying this was the best investment we ever made. Yep. So, that can be a lead generation thing as well. There's lots of different ways to drive traffic or interest. It's not just about closing those people you've already got on the hook.
There were so many good points in there. I think we'll have to wind it back. I want to finish. You mentioned your other business. We've been talking a lot about case studies, but if for no other reason, then it'll give me a chance to say Business Casual Copywriting, which I think is a great name for a business. You have a way with words, clearly. One of the things, you've even done it on this interview, you referred to yourself as a conversion copywriter, not just a copywriter. Why do you feel the need to have the modifier?
I think it just speaks more to the methodology. Copywriter is like wildly, it's like people interpret it almost any way they choose to. For some people, a copywriter they think is someone who writes blog posts, even though I'd call them a content writer, and some blog post writers would say I am a copywriter. Like there's so much ambiguity around the term, that it speaks more to the methodology and the end goal. For other people, a copywriter is someone who writes billboards or radio ads or whatever. And so the modifier, it's kind of, might feel redundant or pedantic, but what it tells people right away is, hey, I deal in web properties, analytics, customer-centric approach. Like that's what I do. It's just a shortcut, a heuristic for people to go, oh yeah, he does web stuff, right? He focuses on that.
Right. And
I don't have to spend more time kind of weeding out poor fit leads who come and be like, hey, can you write me an ebook? It's like, no, I definitely can't.
No, I think it's cool. So, listen, this is the last thing I was going to ask you. If somebody's watching this and maybe they have some marketing budget and they don't know whether they need someone like you. A lot of times we find that they just know how to sell. We work with a lot of auto dealerships. They know how to sell cars, but they don't know if their SEO is working. what are some things that they should be on the lookout that they might need a copywriter?
I think in general, the thing that gets missed, everybody, when we talk about the web, everybody pays homage to like content and copy. And then when they go to do their website, the first thing they think was like, oh, we need a designer. Like, who are we going to get to do design?
Yes,
Like, okay, don't get me wrong. I love designers, but what you say is who you are. How you are perceived, like it is your business. Um, and I would encourage them to think about the fact that like it's not about, people think copywriting is about wordsmithing and being clever and for some reason a lot of puns where it's like we got to put puns in our headline, like stuff. It's odd, but I would be looking at when people, number one, what's your conversion rate? When people come in, how many of them act? What's the alignment like? Then I would talk to your sales team, or if you are your sales team, like what questions do you get all the time that number one, you wish you never had to answer again? And number two, you wish people just knew before bothering to contact you. What questions are you tired of answering? And what questions do you think that if people understood, they just take action? I would then say, go look at your competitors and in a blind test, cover their logo. How much different does your site sound than theirs? If you swap logos, would anyone know that your company was any different at all?
Wow.
Like if you like change things around and like, do you stand out? Back to that thing on questions too, like how qualified are your leads? Like, are they asking a ton of questions? Do they have a bunch of misconceptions? So things like that, right? Or if you run chat on your site, look at the patterns that you're seeing there. What are you being asked constantly? Like, yeah, pricing, everyone gets asked about pricing, it's just given. But like what's happening there? Like if we got time, I'll share a quick story. Maybe it'll like sum this up for people and kind of put it in perspective. Okay. So this is a story about the time I made a company, $156,000 extra dollars in yearly revenue, more or less without writing a word of copy for them. So I got brought in to help a company, little bit of a grim niche. They do online divorces in the UK. And so they knew, they're like, we perform pretty well, but they just had a feeling and an indication, like we feel like for the amount of traffic that we get, we should be able to close more of these. Like we're technically the industry leader. We're every bit as good. Our process is better. We're just not totally sure that people are getting it. So I did an audit for them. And that's, I love audit projects because it's like you're solving a murder mystery. So I came in and one of the things that I found kind of going through analytics, we surfaced a mystery. And that mystery was, okay, for some reason, in the real world, we know women initiate divorce more often than men. It's just statistical fact. Well, on their website, the opposite was true. We're saying, why are so many more men converting than women? The number of women converting was way lower. And so you immediately leap to like, the weird assumptions, like maybe the pictures are too traditionally masculine, or maybe it's something about the language, but it's none of those things, right? Like the obvious answer is rarely the answer. So we wanted to solve this mystery and started to dig. And the first thing we did is we went to chat logs and we separated conversations between people who obviously identified as male and obviously identified as female. And we looked at the patterns in the conversations and noticed something. We noticed pretty easy close. Men asked about pricing and so on. They didn't have a whole lot of concerns. It was like, yep, it's convenient. How long does it take? Stuff you'd expect. When we looked at the conversations for women, we saw a totally different set of conversations happening. We saw conversations like, hey, I'm responsible for the kids. Can you cover that in your offering? Is that something you can consider in your offering? They said, hey, I'm actually, in a really tragic way, I'm fearful of my spouse. Do I ever have to sit across the table from this person? I'm interested in the online option because I never want to come close to this person again. We noticed they have questions about property, like the house, do you deal with assets? And then one of the more interesting things is we saw, okay, lots of men during regular work hours. And then on the tail end, right when work hours were about to end, or in the odd time that the chat was on after regular work hours, women were there. Well, then when we dug into that, we kind of realized they're more likely to be working more than one job to support themselves. So like they don't have the availability always. If they don't get in there on their lunch break, they may not have a chance to talk to someone. And if they don't talk to someone about these things, they're less likely to convert. So not a word of copy has been written yet, but the recommendation that I was able to come back with was to go through their sales pages and say, hey, you don't talk about these things, these issues that are really important to this contingent of your buyer. The good news is your competitors don't really talk about these things either. If you introduce some language around what you can take care of and just answer those nagging questions, I'm pretty sure you're going to see some positive movement. Well, they went away. They made one other change that it's not important to this conversation, but they made two core changes. One, they got rid of this fees calculator thing, which like is totally other conversation. The other is that they implemented that language. They added just some very simple language around like, yes, we can help you if there's concerns about assets, about children. No, you don't ever have to sit across from your spouse. And just on the back of that, not rocket science, just empathy, just listening, just knowing where the unanswered questions were, 6 figures in added revenue, not a whole lot of work. My fee paid for itself like more than, like multiple times over. So, that is what I would say if I was having beer with someone who was like, why would I ever get a conversion copywriter? Because you are so in the thick of your business. And like every business owner, you think you know your customers so well, you think you know them inside and out, that you've probably lost the ability to really see them and really hear them. And there's probably gaps that are there that you're just not seeing. And that's what a good copywriter is going to come in and do. They're going to find those gaps. They're going to close those gaps. They're going to position you in a way that, you can't swap logos and still think it's some other company. They're going to give you that edge. They're going to make you the best answer, very similar to SEO, right? You want your content to be the best answer. You want your company to be the most relatable, the best mirror, the best place people see themselves in that offer. So,
well, that's a great way to wrap it up. I think that's outstanding. I'm going to move forward to everyone's favorite part of the show. This is where Greg Gifford gives me a question without any context. So neither you nor me know anything about this. It's a bit of a high wire act for both of us. For you, he has said New Zealand. Does that country ring a bell to you at all?
Yeah, it's like my favorite place on the planet. I went on the adventure of a lifetime there. My wife and I, before we had kids, we wanted to live such that we wouldn't look back and go, I wish we'd done that. And so we decided we were going to live in New Zealand for at least 6 months. At the end of the day, I think we were there like 8 months, and it was like the time of my life. I can't wait to get back there.
Awesome. Well, that's outstanding. Joel, if people are interested, how do they reach out to you? What's your favorite social media and what's the URL for your business?
Yeah. So you can, there's lots of like prescriptive how-to type stuff on casestudy.com. So whether you are looking to hire to get that done, or you just want to do them better yourself, like you'll leave our blog knowing how to do stuff better. So that's one place. If you want to chat with me, Twitter, so at Joel Klettke, and LinkedIn, I'm always happy to connect there. Every podcast, I couch it with the caveat and say, I don't always respond fast, but I always respond. So, I do my best, but I'm always interested in answering questions or sharing. And I like to meet interesting people building and doing interesting things. So that's probably the best spot. Hard pass on Facebook. Just don't do it. Instagram, same things. Like you don't, unless you really want to see pictures of my kids for some reason, it's not going to be an interesting place for you. But yeah, Twitter and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, Joel, thanks again for coming on. I'm going to wrap it there. I'll give you a virtual cheers from Chicago.
Cheers.
Hope to see you on the road sometime. I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've really got like this empathy superpower that's really interesting to kind of unpack. So hope to see you on the road. And in the meantime, we'll be back next week with another episode of Suds Search. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks, Mark.